Earl Macmillan commented, "It is clearly evident that the turning point of Mark's gospel is to be found in the recognition of Jesus as the Messiah. Upon the basis of that recognition, Jesus began to teach his followers that the way of suffering was to be his way. This was met with a complete lack of understanding. As has been mentioned, the disciples found it extremely difficult to comprehend how glory should ever be found in such humiliation. It was therefore necessary for Jesus to teach his followers about discipleship. They must go the way of their master." The confession of Jesus and subsequent rebuke of Peter is followed by a series of sayings that describe the cost of discipleship. Jesus, in our text today, explains what it means to follow a crucified Messiah. Read with me from Mark chapter 8, beginning with verse 34. "Then he called the crowd to him along with his disciples and said, 'If anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for me and for the gospel will save it. What good is it for a man to gain the whole world, yet forfeit his soul? Or what can a man give in exchange for his soul? If anyone is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will be ashamed of him when he comes in his Father's glory with the holy angels.' And he said to them, 'I tell you the truth, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see the kingdom of God come with power.'" At verse 34, we note that Jesus is no longer talking just to his disciples, but he calls the crowd, and he speaks to them and to the disciples. Jesus has just asked the disciples in private, "Who do people say I am?" They've answered with the reply, "Well, some think that you're this prophet or that prophet." Then Jesus became more direct, "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter said, "You are the Christ." It was at that point that Jesus begins to explain to the disciples, that is the 12, what is going to happen to him. That he is going to suffer, that he's going to be put to death, that he's going to be raised from the dead. This did not fit their definition or the general public's definition of what the Messiah was to be. But Jesus begins from this point on to really spend time trying to get his disciples to understand what kind of Messiah he is. And that Messiah will be a suffering Messiah. Along with that, Jesus speaks not only to the disciples, but to those around about what it means to truly be his disciple. If anyone would come after me, in other words, if anyone would be my follower, Jesus was a teacher. Disciples were students of the teacher. There is even more involved. Jesus is the Messiah. And he says, if anyone would be a follower of me, here is what they must do. They must deny themselves, take up the cross and follow me. One of the key verses on discipleship in all the Gospels, according to this verse, would-be followers of Jesus must practice self-denial and must bear their own crosses. Well, just exactly what does that mean? Let's keep in mind that when Mark writes his gospel, we believe his audience to be Christians in Rome. And they have been undergoing persecution, and more persecution will come. This is a message they need in particular. It's a message that is still very timely today. Just as timely as when Jesus first spoke to the disciples and those that were around. What does it really mean to follow Jesus? Well, following a crucified Messiah means self-denial. You have to say no to yourself. Now, denying self is difficult. I don't know about you, but I have had difficulty in doing that. And especially over the years, I've had difficulty in doing that when it came to eating. I needed to do more push-aways, push away from the table. If I had done so, I might have avoided or delayed diabetes and heart disease. But self-denial is more critical in our spiritual life. For some, they are unwilling to deny themselves hardly anything. I want to tell a lie about someone. They do it. I want to sleep with someone who is not my spouse. They do it. Whatever sin you can mention, there are those who commit that sin because they are unwilling to say no to self. We cannot say yes to God without saying no to self and what self wants. Not only that, Jesus says the follower must take up his cross and follow me. Take up his cross. Well, this is a willingness to die for Jesus. In the audience that Jesus had, they were well aware of what crucifixion was. It was reserved for the worst of criminals. Rome would use it at times very widely, especially after the church began. At one point, Christian after Christian would be nailed to the cross. When Mark's first readers heard the gospel, this gospel, they were well acquainted with what the cross meant. And sometimes when you take up your cross, it is that you're even willing to die for the Lord. Follow me. We must go wherever Jesus goes, even if it is to a cross. To follow Jesus, there must be a complete abandonment of a claim to one's own life. Now all belongs to Jesus. William Lane said, "Only in following on the way to the cross is it possible to understand either the necessity of Jesus' humiliation or Jesus himself. To truly know Jesus, we have to be in touch with his demands here. Say no to self. Be willing even to go and die for Jesus, and then follow him." In verse 35, we see that any attempt to maintain control for ourselves will end up costing us everything. Giving up that control for Jesus' sake gains us everything. The one who wants to save his life, Jesus says, will lose it. There will be those, and there may still be those, who will be called upon to deny that Jesus is Lord. And if they do so, their life will be spared. There have been those who have said, well, I kind of like living. They deny the Lord. But thankfully, there have been many who have said, I will die for Jesus. He died for me. And they will not try to save their own life. Trying to preserve your own life can lead to you losing all. Jesus said, whoever loses his life for me and for the gospel will save it. And then Jesus asked a question. What good is it, or what is the profit, if a person should gain the whole world, yet forfeit his soul? What would a person give in exchange for their soul? We value different things. On some things in life, we place great value. Jesus says, what if you could have the whole world, but you would have to lose your soul in exchange for that? He asked a very simple, direct question. And basically the answer is nothing in the world, not even everything in the world, is as valuable as our soul. If we lose it, we lose everything. And we note that Jesus doesn't really say he loses his soul, but forfeits. This is a decision we make. Am I going to go after the things of this world and make that my priority? Or am I even willing to give up the things of this world to follow Jesus? Am I going to commit to him totally? Jesus says, you die. You've gained everything in the world. But what would you give 30 seconds after death to regain your soul? But after death, it's too late. The decision to follow Jesus must be made now. Nothing is more valuable than spending eternity in heaven. Our response to Christ and his teaching determines our eternal destiny. Jesus speaks of being ashamed of Jesus, being ashamed of his words. There are many, and he describes this adulterous and sinful generation. He says there are many who are ashamed of him. He says that Jesus will be ashamed of him. He will be ashamed of them when he comes in his glory. Jesus speaks even more clearly about this in other settings. If you confess me before my Father in heaven, I will confess you before my Father in heaven. If you deny me before men, I think I said that wrong the first one. But if you deny me before men, I will deny you before my Father in heaven. It is here, for the first time, I believe, that Jesus refers to himself in public as the Son of Man, his favorite designation for himself. Someday, Jesus is going to return. He's going to come in his glory. Where will we be then? What will our status be? If we've been ashamed of him, if we have not given up self and followed him, he will be ashamed of us. And then, chapter 9, verse 1, that little designation didn't need to be there to break things up. Jesus is speaking to those gathered on that occasion. He says to them, I tell you the truth. Some of you who are standing here will not taste death before they see the kingdom of God come with power. Some of you who are hearing my words right now, you're not going to die until you see the kingdom of God, the rule of God, come with power. Well, that statement of Jesus has brought about a whole lot of conjecture and comments and interpretation from Bible scholars. What is he referring to? Is he referring to the beginning of the church on the day of Pentecost? That's when the kingdom began. Is he referring to his own resurrection from the dead? Is he referring to his transfiguration, which is immediately following, which we'll look at, Lord willing, next week? Is he talking about all three? Perhaps we need to recognize the fact that the coming of the kingdom of God is not so much a one point in time. Jesus said the kingdom of God is among you. He also spoke of the kingdom as coming in the future. The kingdom is the reign of God, not so much a territory. But Jesus is saying that some of you are going to witness a very glorious event. Transfiguration fits that. His coming fits that. If we follow Jesus, if we participate in his suffering, we will also participate in his glory. We need to remember that Mark 8 is very much the turning point in the gospel. Jesus is now clearly identified. He is the Messiah. A transfiguration will further clarify his identity. And with that, he will begin his journey to the cross. What does it mean to deny yourself, to carry your cross, and follow Jesus? Most of us will face little persecution as Christians. And it is unlikely that we will be executed for following Jesus. we should be ready to do so if needed. But for most of us, the challenge is to follow Jesus for many years. Some tasks can be done well for a short while, but maintaining them for a long time can be a challenge. It was about 40 years ago that a teenager at the congregation in Virginia challenged me to a race. Her name was Michelle. Now, I was older, I was overweight, and I was certainly no athlete. But I agreed to race her. But I said, we'll race from here to there, just a short distance away. I won. If the race had been a little longer, I would have lost. Many things can be done for a short period of time, but doing them longer is more difficult. And we must realize that the Christian life for most is not a sprint, but more like a marathon. Someone said, God will forgive you for starting late, but not for quitting early. Another saying expresses a similar sentiment. There is no early retirement for Christians. Many times we refer to the statement in Revelation, be faithful unto the point of death, and I will give you the crown of life. When John wrote those words, he was very literally saying to those first readers, you be faithful even if it means your execution for the Lord, and you'll receive the crown of life. For most of us, being faithful unto death is living whatever life we have until the end for the Lord. Debbie's mother, Rosemarie, met her dad, Ralph, when they were 16 years old. She was actually dating another fella, a friend of Ralph's. I don't know what the deal was, but Ralph went on their dates. Ralph decided pretty quick Rosemarie was going to be his. But they had begun dating. Rosemarie began attending church with him. She began studying her Bible. One Wednesday night, Ralph had to work at the service station. Rosemarie was at church that evening, and she made the decision to be baptized into Christ. Ralph wasn't there, but she said, I'm going to be baptized into Christ. I'm going to give my life to Christ. In fact, Ralph heard the news from a friend who came by the service station after church. With that, Rosemarie became a faithful follower of Jesus for over 80 years. On Thursday, an elder at Angie's congregation went to be with the Lord. He was 77 years of age, had served the Lord for many years. On Friday, my cousin Karen died at the age of 69. She had been a Christian for many, many years. Yesterday, our brother John went to be with the Lord. I think he was 90 years old. Been a Christian for many years, been an elder of this congregation for so many years. For these individuals and for so many others, and perhaps for us, the challenge is to maintain the Christian race, not for a sprint, but for the long haul. To deny ourselves when necessary, to take up our cross, and to follow Jesus.